What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Blue Star Lunch Hour. I am Joey Ikes. I am not joined today by John Owning because it is his turn to deal with internet issues today. The joys of this podcasting environment that we all live in is that we get to deal with these internet issues sometimes, and when we do, we have to fight through them, and that's okay because that's exactly what we're going to do. So today we are going to look at the Cowboys 2020 NFL draft class. And the idea is that for the next 4 weeks or so, we're going to take a draft class starting in 2020, and we're going to go through that class year by year 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. And we're going to review that draft class, see how their careers have gone so far, where they are on the depth chart, what we expect from them going into the 2024 season, if we expect them to be a part of the 2024 season for the Cowboys at all. And the purpose for this is, or the reason for this decision, the reason for this idea of doing this is the Cowboys depend on and lean on the draft more heavily than really any other team in the NFL. And I say that because they spend less on outside veteran players than any other team does. And despite the fact that they claim that their goal is to always re-sign their own, they relatively regularly allow starting level players to leave in free agency, to go find other teams, get paid. And the idea being that they receive back compensatory picks and that increases their ability to then use the draft. Occasionally, we see them trade those picks for veteran players, like they did last year with Stephon Gilmore and Brandon Cooks. They also did it with Trey Lance. So for the guys that get drafted by the Cowboys, the expectations from the fan base are through the roof, almost unfairly so, just because of the fact that the Cowboy fans don't get exciting veteran players in the process to think about, talk about, be excited about early on in the season or early on in the off season. They are kind of stuck preparing for, getting ready for, looking forward to the draft, and then this expectation builds up really high for the Cowboys draftees, and then you wind up with really leaning on these young players in their rookie contracts for the sake of improving your roster year over year. So we're going to look at this 2020 draft class. We're going to leverage our friends at Pro Football Reference that, for my money, have the best information about this kind of stuff available. Or the easiest access to this kind of information, I should say. We're going to start at the top of the class. CeeDee Lamb goes without saying, man. And as Ultra points out, that the Cowboys have drafted better with Mike McCarthy than they had before. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. They drafted pretty well with Jason Garrett as the head coach, but one of the things that is kind of important, and one of the reasons we chose these last four draft classes, is the idea that these are the four draft classes that Mike McCarthy has been the head coach for. So we have seen this team now. Basically the entire team is guys a great majority of the team is guys who have been drafted or signed with Mike McCarthy as the Cowboys head coach. So his first draft class, going into what could be his final year as the head coach, it's an interesting time to look at these draft classes as we get ready for the season. So as we look at the draft class, it starts with and is headlined by, we all remember, everybody who was following the Cowboys in this way remembers what it was like as we watched the Cowboys, as we watched the draft play out, as we waited and waited and waited for pick 17. It felt like forever because of the fact that the Cowboys, whether people want to acknowledge it now going into the 2024 season or not, had a need at wide receiver. The Cowboys were coming off of a season where they had traded for Amari Cooper in the 2018 season and drafted Michael Gallup. They had gone through the 2019 season, which was Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper. And they really, and we can even go back to the 2020 or the 2019 season, and we can take a look through the receiving rankings. If we look at who the leading target getters on the team, it was Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and they had signed Randall Cobb. And Randall Cobb was leaving in free agency that year. 2019 was the Jason Witten return from retirement year. Goodness gracious. And then you have, Ezekiel Elliott getting 71 targets. So they had a significant number of targets in the passing game leaving in free agency that year. They had Randall Cobb leaving. They had Jason Witten gone. They had a significant need for pass catchers in the 2020 offseason. And so when they go into that draft, a lot of people don't see wide receiver as a need because everybody was thinking, oh, they have to draft an edge rusher. They have to draft a pass rusher. And because of that, they thought that they were going to either take a corner or a defensive end early in the draft. So when CeeDee Lamb was falling to them, the question was, would the Cowboys take the best player available, or would they stick to what we all perceived as the biggest need for the roster, which was defensive end or cornerback? When they drafted CeeDee Lamb, Cowboys Nation went bonkers. Team 40 Burger was coined by guys like Mike White and Jeff Kavanaugh, and it became it was a pretty awesome time to be a Cowboys fan because it feels very rare that someone with the star power of a CeeDee Lamb coming out of college falls to the point where the Cowboys have the opportunity to pick them. Because the Cowboys have been, let's all admit it, for the most part, for most of the last decade, the Cowboys have been a very good team. There have been a couple of years where the starting quarterback has been injured for the full season, and there's been some fall-off seasons. And that's how you wind up with the 4th overall pick to take Ezekiel Elliott in 2016. That's how you wind up with a high enough draft pick in 2021 to be able to trade back and still draft Micah Parsons. But rarely have the Cowboys had the opportunity to draft guys with this level of star power and chutzpah and pizzazz on their roster. And they had the opportunity to take him. They had a need at the position. They had 170 targets or so that went out the door in free agency following 2019, as Randall Cobb and Jason Witten went out the door. There was so much pointing to the idea that this pick for CeeDee Lamb made a ton of sense. And he came in, and we'll go to CeeDee's page now on Pro Football Reference. And all he's done is just produce at an insanely high level. 74 catches for 935 and 5 touchdowns as a rookie, playing as, kind of the 2A type receiver in an offense is pretty phenomenal. And then to go from that in 2020 to 2021, where he only has 5 more catches, but his yards per reception goes up so much. He goes from 930, adds almost 200 total yards on 5 catches, on 5 additional catches, adds an additional touchdown. And then in 2022, the Cowboys make the move to move on from Amari Cooper. We can and maybe will in this channel have that conversation at some point, although we're getting to the point now where it's old enough news that maybe it's not worth having the conversation too much anymore. He really sort of steps forward into what what they wanted CeeDee Lamb to become. And we'll look at the wrong page there. We'll look at the 2022 Cowboys here. And maybe I'm misremembering the year. Maybe Amari Cooper was still on the team in 2022. Maybe I'm just crazy. No, he wasn't. Okay. See, this is what happens when you do this stuff live. Yeah, so CeeDee Lamb goes, he jumps, and we see the pass offense now in 2022 is really run through CeeDee Lamb at this point. This 2022, all these years blend together after we've done this for so long. 2022 was the Noah Brown as wide receiver 3 role, Michael Gallup getting hurt and all that other kind of stuff. The passing offense really ran through CeeDee Lamb, and they were really darn good. Has almost 1,400 yards and 9 touchdowns. Really steps forward into the limelight as a wide receiver. Wide receiver 1 as one of the 5 to 10 best wide receivers in the NFL. And just when we thought, hey, I don't know that there's that much left, there's that much more room for CeeDee Lamb to grow beyond 1,400 yards and 9 touchdowns, he goes and takes an additional 30 targets, catches another 28 balls, and goes for 1,750 yards and 12 touchdowns. It was just an insane wide receiver season from CeeDee Lamb in 2023. He was, for all intents and purposes, for most of the season, he was almost the entirety of the passing offense in 2023. And it's pretty phenomenal to see a player really occupy that much real estate within an offense, within a passing offense in the 2023, the modern NFL, where NFL defenses are so flexible and they can do so many different things, and they can really decide if they want to take a player away from an offense, they can really do it most of the time. For the Cowboys to be able to take CeeDee Lamb and make him that high priority of the offensive figure, it's pretty phenomenal. So long story short here on CeeDee Lamb. He has been everything that you possibly could have imagined the 17th overall pick at wide receiver is going to be. A first-team All-Pro, 3 Pro Bowls. Like, he is the centerpiece of the Cowboys' passing offense in a way that very few NFL players are the centerpiece of their team's passing offense. Just a phenomenal pick to kick off the Mike McCarthy era for the Dallas Cowboys. And then we wait through the entire rest of the first round. We wait through half of the second round. We get to pick 51. And Trevon Diggs, a guy who we were talking about as a possibility of like a fallback option at 17 overall. If, we're going to talk about some of these names, guys like Kayvon Chason and guys like that were picked ahead of the Cowboys at 17. Hey, maybe we take Trevon Diggs. And then he's there available at 51. And the Cowboys take him at 51 overall. And even though he missed, a significant portion of the season, I think he tore his ACL in a practice in week 4 of last year, missed most of the year last year. He has been phenomenal for the Cowboys in what is really 3 full seasons. And even early in his career, even that rookie year, when the production wasn't there, the defense was a disaster under Mike Nolan in 2020. CeeDee Lamb showed a lot of the things that you want to see, even though he was getting beat a little bit. But year by year, he showed consistent improvement in different areas. He went out and got the football a lot more in 2021. Has the crazy interception season. 2022 comes back just a little bit off the interceptions, but play to play and coverage is much better. 2023, he's probably playing, I think most people would say, and I think John would agree with me if he was here, playing his best football in 2023 early in the season, and winds up getting hurt. And so now he's going to get ready to come back in 2024. We've seen these guys. Luckily for him, the injury was early in the 2023 season, so hopefully he should actually be ready to play early in 2024, where a lot of these guys try to come back so early, or they go through the offseason and come back and they're not quite ready. We saw it with Michael Gallup. We've seen it with some of these guys where they try to come back from these age. Terrence Steele, I think it's pretty good. piece of evidence of this too. They try to come back in that year one after the ACL, and they're just not quite the same guy right away. You got to hope the Trevon Diggs injury was early enough in the season that we can feel relatively good about him coming back and being the Trevon Diggs that we know and remember. And Trevon is one of those guys that, like, we talk a lot about like the Dan Quinn influence on this Cowboys defense and going to get the football and all that kind of stuff. And there's probably some Al Harris influence in that as well. But a guy like Trevon Diggs, like we all know the story at this point, was a wide receiver at Alabama to start out. Nick Saban comes to him and says, hey, we want to move you to corner. And he goes to corner, and he's phenomenal. And so he didn't have a ton of experience coming into the league, which kind of speaks to the development that he's shown over the first few years in the league and just how phenomenal he's been. I mean, he's another guy with one first-team All-Pro, two Pro Bowls in his first 3 years in the league, 4 years in the league, and he missed one of those years with an injury. So he's basically right on the same track, just didn't have that big major step-up year like CeeDee Lamb had in 2023. Trevon just missed a lot of that opportunity. But these two guys, the 17th overall pick and the 51st overall pick, it's hard to imagine, especially you think about their two, as Katie Drummond would call them, money five positions on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. So they're premium positions. They were big positions of need early. They're positions that the Cowboys, it feels like they continually and consistently have needs at wide receiver and corner. Part of that is because so many guys play at those spots. And they have just been like, set it and forget it. This is wide receiver one. This is cornerback one. And some of that stuff is a little bit overrated, but these guys have just been set it and forget it, top of the depth chart guys for the Cowboys for multiple years now, coming off of the 2020 draft. It's pretty phenomenal to hit those two guys back to back in a draft. And that it's funny because that almost makes nothing else that happens for the rest of the draft really matter all that much. And we'll get into the rest of the draft here in a minute, but one of the topics that comes up as we prepare for the draft every year is we all do, a million of these mock draft simulations, right? We go to the PFF mock draft machine and we go through iteration after iteration after iteration and change after change after change. And we see these situations where in 2020, we would be saying, there is no way CeeDee Lamb is available at the 17th overall pick. So I'm going to skip him in this one so that my draft looks more realistic. Or I'm going to restart the simulator because there's no way he's available. The guy who I would really wind up picking got taken early, but CeeDee Lamb should have gone earlier than that. So I'm going to start the simulation over. There's no way Trevon Diggs lasts until the 51st overall pick in the draft. He's too good. He's going to be a late first-round player, early second-round player. There's no way he lasts to the 51st overall pick. This isn't realistic. I'm going to start the simulator over. I'm going to skip Trevon Diggs and not pick him because it's not realistic. And what this draft really proves, and this is the draft that I point to all the time on this idea, is that if it can happen in one of these simulators, it can happen in the real draft. And so we should absolutely not ignore those types of situations when they come up in the simulator, because if it comes up in the simulator, there's a chance it could happen in real life. Now, I don't know if you guys noticed, you run the simulator in 2024, there is never a time when Caleb Williams drops to the 24th overall pick available for the Cowboys. There may be a time or two where he's the second pick in the draft or the third pick in the draft, but he never drops to the 24th overall pick. So the simulators are pretty good at, for the most part, giving you some iteration, some version, somewhere in the multiverse, there is a scenario where CeeDee Lamb falls to 17th overall and Trevon Diggs falls to 51st overall. So we will not, and this is the example I will point to forever and ever. We will never discredit the possibilities of what could happen in one of these mock draft scenarios. So back to the Cowboys 2020 draft. The next pick is Neville Gallimore. And Neville is a tough situation coming into the league. And it's it's hard to have this conversation now, and I wish John was here because we'd be having this conversation together, and he would illustrate it really well. The Cowboys have this tendency to see players who play in schemes in college who that don't ask them to, because most of the Cowboys schemes over the last 12 years at this point, with a little bit of exception for the Mike Nolan year, but even then, not really, have been very focused on, since Monty Kiffin was hired in 2012, the focus has been guys getting upfield and getting off the ball on the defensive line. And so in that, the athletic traits are super valuable, even for interior defensive linemen. The athletic traits are super valuable. The testing is super valuable, all that kind of stuff. So with that being the case, a guy like Neville Gallimore, and we just had this conversation. We had this conversation earlier this week when we were talking about Mazi Smith, where he's a guy who you see him play in a scheme in college. And there's a whole conversation to be had about these college defenses and the way they play and how much it translates to the NFL. And there's a lot of the college meta that's coming to the NFL with these mint fronts and these tight fronts that we'll talk about some as we get ready to get into the season, because this kind of scheme stuff is important to understand so that when we get into the season, we start doing some of these film reviews that we're going to try to do. Once we get into the year, we have the ability to understand what we're watching, what we're looking at. Neville played in a scheme in Oklahoma where he was playing in kind of a frog stance type 4-point stance, where he was not asked to get off the ball and all these sorts of things. And everybody looked at him and said, hey, Neville's got a chance to be a guy who, he had a very, very high level speed elite, like a speed RAS score. So high level, ran a 4.79 40-yard dash at over 300 pounds, like super speed athlete, really high level 10-yard split. Didn't test quite as well in the 3-cone or the short shuttle or things like that, but pretty good tested athleticism from a speed standpoint. The Cowboys saw that and said, hey, if we can just change the way he plays the position, we can unlock those physical traits, and we think he can be a really high-level interior defensive lineman for us. Now, ask me how similar that sounds to 2023. The Cowboys draft Mazi Smith in the first round. And we're going to do the 2023 class in a few weeks, but with the 2023 class, they draft Mazi Smith in the first round, and we hear them say, yeah, he played this style of play at Michigan, but we think we can narrow up his stance. We can get him focused on getting off the ball better. And all of that athleticism that we know he has, that he showed in the testing, that got him on Bruce Feldman's freaks list for 2 years, all of that kind of stuff is going to show up on the field. We've seen we saw them do this with Charles Tapper. Like, I don't even remember what year Charles Tapper was drafted, but it's the same idea. He plays a 4-eye or a 5 technique. He plays inside. He never gets to get up the field. He's always playing at the line of scrimmage. But holy cow, look at that. Look at this athleticism. We're going to change the way he plays, and we're going to unlock this athleticism. And I may be misremembering, and that's quite possible. I don't remember very many, if any, situations where that on the defensive line has worked out very well for them. It's really hard to play defensive line in the NFL. And if you're trying, the NFL is not the place necessarily to learn how to do new things, especially in the trenches. You've got to come in, and the guys who come in and play well early in their career, it's because they come in and they play in a very similar style to what they played in early in their career. Or they're, Zach Martin, and they're just very, very refined coming into the league. And they're so well established in their techniques and their movement capabilities, and their elite athletes on top of that, that they're capable of just jumping into whatever style you want to put them in. But for the most part, if you want a guy in the trenches to play very well early in the season or early in their rookie contract, which again, we're going to talk about the Cowboys, how much they rely on the NFL draft to be the thing that builds their team. You need these guys to play well, and you need these guys to play well early. And I mean, we were talking about Neville Gallimore over the last 2 years about whether he was going to even make the Cowboys roster. Now, I think he probably had his best season of his career this past year with Dan Quinn in 2023. But I think that if you ask Neville, if you ask the Cowboys, they would say that for the 82nd overall pick, they were relatively disappointed in what came from Neville Gallimore. He is obviously no longer a part of the Cowboys. He signed with the Dolphins this year. Awesome. Best of luck to Neville. But he is not a part of the Cowboys in the 2024 season. And now this is a theme. We can look at the rest of the draft class at a very high level here. We're not going to take the whole hour today. Without John here, it gets hard to take the whole hour, and it's hard for me to talk for a whole hour about 7 players, 7 players. But if we look at the rest of the draft class, there's not a single player past Trevon Diggs that is still on the Cowboys roster going into their 5th year in the NFL. And some of these guys, I mean, 3 out of these 5 guys that we're talking about didn't even make it to their 5th year in the NFL. This is why we say all the time that drafting is really hard. You can have maybe the best back-to-back pick stretch that you've had, pick 1 and pick 2, 17 and 51 overall. I mean, maybe since, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, maybe like Des Bryant and Sean Lee in 2010. But it's really hard to think of a better duo back-to-back 1 and 2 that they've picked. A lot of their best first-round picks have been followed by like really iffy, questionable second-round picks. And so for them to take CeeDee Lamb and then turn it back around and take Trevon Diggs and take, just hit the ball right down the fairway with their second-round pick and pick Trevon Diggs and he becomes an all-pro type corner, that's pretty phenomenal in the top 2 picks of the draft. That's massive impact from a draft class. And yet, going into year 5, only 2 of the 7 players the Cowboys picked in that draft are on the Cowboys roster going into year 5. And only 4 of those 7 players even made it to through the 4th year of their rookie, or only 4 of them made it to the 3rd year of their rookie contract. And I believe Bradley and I didn't even make it through the 2nd year of his rookie contract with the Cowboys. Yeah, he only made it through a few games of his rookie contract with the Cowboys in the 2nd season. So this is why we talk about drafting being so hard. And this is why we talk about how you cannot simply rely on the draft to fill in your roster. Because even if you hit an absolute grand slam in the 1st and 2nd round, there's a really good chance those are the only players on your team 4 years later. I mean, it was a very, very good 4th-round pick. I mean, Tyler Biadasz started a ton of games for the Cowboys over the course of his career. He started 53 games over 4 years for the Cowboys. He was a full-time starter from the start of his 2nd season all the way through 2023. And the 2020 thing, there's all kinds of shuffling going on the offensive line that year. He got to play because of some injury, played relatively well, gave us some idea that he was going to be able to play well the rest of his career. That's a phenomenal 4th-round pick. But even with that, you still only have 2 of these 7 guys left on your team going into year 5. This is why I talk about on Twitter all the time, and I'll talk about it here too as we go, is the idea that 5 years in the NFL is football eternity. Is that you cannot think about 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road when you're trying to build a team, when you're trying to think about these teams and what the best decisions are, because you have no idea what the NFL is going to look like 5 years from now. You have no idea how many. I mean, if you would have looked at this class, and I'm old enough to remember it. I know the Bradley and I conversation will be really tough for John to be having right now. We were all very excited when Bradley and I lasted until the 5th round because of some injury stuff and the Cowboys took him. But we were talking about Reggie Robinson II as a future starting outside cornerback across from Trevon Diggs, and that the Cowboys had just drafted their starting cornerback duo for the next decade, all in one draft. And he played 5 games on special teams, almost never touched the field on defense on a historically bad defense in 2020. Never touched the field. I believe he got hurt and then just never really amounted to anything. And now they bounced him back and forth like, hey, he's going to play some corner, he's going to play some safety. And he played 65 special team snaps in 2023. And that's it. So when you look at these draft classes, we look at this 2024 draft class that the Cowboys just have, going through all these players and these potential roles and all this kind of stuff. This 2020 class is a great example of a class that we were extremely excited about coming out of the draft. And a big part of that's driven by those top 2 guys. And those top 2 guys have earned and lived up to every bit of excitement and glory and all those kinds of things that we could have imagined coming out of that draft. But the rest of the class, Neville Gallimore, we just talked about, signed with Miami as a free agent, played a bunch of games, played 52 games, contributed some, but there were times in 2022 and especially, and even 2023 a little bit, but in 2021, 2022, Neville Gallimore was a liability on the defensive line. He was awesome on sounds of the sideline. Seems like a great guy, really, really exciting, really enticing, really engaging. That's the word I'm looking for. But it just never clicked for him in the NFL the way that everybody hoped it would. Reggie Robinson plays 65 snaps in the NFL, and he's out of the league. Tyler Biadasz is your starting center for 3 years, and he leaves in free agency. Bradley and I last for, plays 11 games for you as a pro. He's gone after 2 years or a year and a half. And then Ben DiNucci, your 7th round pick, winds up starting a game as your starting quarterback his rookie season out of James Madison because of quarterback injuries and all that kind of stuff. And then doesn't come back to you and then is let go the next year. Plays 1 season for you. This is the nature of the NFL draft, and this is not me criticizing the Cowboys. The Cowboys got 3 multi-year starters out of this team. 4 guys in this class have played, Trevon Diggs would have if he hadn't gotten hurt this past year. We would have 4 guys from this class that played over 60 games for the Cowboys in their career. This is a really good draft class. But when you look at it 5 years down the road, there's only 2 guys left. There's only 2 guys left from this draft class. So if you are an NFL team and all you do is draft, but 5 years after a draft class, only 2 guys on your team are left, you simply cannot draft enough good players to make up for that. This is why we preach all the time that you have to use stuff outside of the draft to build your team. Lazar, same thing. I was with you, man. Such high hopes for Reggie Robinson. They bounced him from position to position. He got hurt, barely played. Just a tough situation for sure for a guy that we all had. Every draft class, it feels like we come out of it with these high hopes for these players. This year, it's probably, I think Cooper Beebe is probably that mid-round pick type player that everybody's the most excited about for the Cowboys. That we all expect to come in and be a starter. Sometimes it works out really well. Sometimes you wind up with Reggie Robinson or Matt Johnson or somebody like that out of the fourth round who never materializes and turns into a unicorn that you never see out in the wild. So that's the 2020 draft class for the Dallas Cowboys. We make it a little bigger here so we can see it as we look through it one more time. CeeDee Lamb, phenomenal, all-pro, one of the 2 or 3 best wide receivers in the game, is going to get paid like it soon, hopefully, unless Stephen Jones continues to be Stephen Jones and decide not to do anything until he absolutely has to. Trevon Diggs, absolutely phenomenal. We hope the recovery from the injury is going very well. Neville Gallimore, disappointing as a Cowboy. We wish him all the best in Miami. Seems like a great guy. Reggie Robinson, I mean, that's probably one of the great mysteries of recent Cowboys fandom is what happened with Reggie Robinson in terms of the position switch. Maybe the defensive coordinator change hurt him. Who knows? Tyler Biadasz, again, solid starting player. Has gone in free agency, signed a solid starting interior offensive line center contract. Bradley and I, a lot of hope for that guy, but some injury stuff, all that kind of stuff. And, some size concerns too coming into the league kept him from ever being the guy that we sort of hoped and wished he could be. Yeah, there we go, Lazar. Another cornerback this year, Kalen Carson. See, there's one of these guys every year, and sometimes it materializes into sometimes it materializes into Deron Bland. Sometimes it turns into Reggie Robinson or Matt Johnson. Hopefully, Kalen Carson is more Deron Bland than Reggie Robinson. We will have to see there. And then Ben DiNucci, maybe the biggest contribution that Ben DiNucci has made to the Cowboys is the apparel brand that he started. So you guys will very often see, and I'm going to see if I can pull one of them up here. You will see Dak wear these hats like this, where he's got the upside down Dallas logo on it, and you can see Ben DiNucci here wearing it. That brand is Ben DiNucci's brand. So maybe the biggest contribution that he has made as a member of the Dallas Cowboys sort of culture, family, etc., is you see all these guys, you see this stuff all over the place. This true brand company from Ben DiNucci, and you see him here with Dak. Like, this is awesome. These things have become like relatively iconic in the Dallas Cowboys sports culture. That might be, it might be the biggest impact. Here we go. This is iconic Texas right here. Whataburger hat in the true brand aesthetic. Here's Luka, big time for Luka and the Mavericks right now. That might be Ben DiNucci's biggest contribution to the Cowboys is the hats. And that's pretty awesome. Like it's awesome that he's been able to do that, and we're excited for Ben. But yeah, this exercise is interesting, and this exercise is fun because it gives us the opportunity to look back at these classes, figure out, where were we right, where were we wrong in our pre-draft stuff and our post-draft stuff, what happened in the meantime, but also really to illustrate like this drafting thing is really, really difficult, and it's going to be tough for this team to continue to just draft and just draft and just draft and continue to show a complete disdain for going out and signing outside free agents. But we'll see what happens. I mean, the Cowboys are going to have an interesting year this year. We all know what the scenario is with a bunch of guys going into the last year of their contract. CeeDee Lamb being one of those guys going into the fifth-year option on his contract. We hope that changes very soon. We hope that John's internet issues get resolved very soon so he can be back with us next week. I hope that you join us again next week on the Blue Star Lunch Hour. We got some fun ideas. I got some stuff I'm kicking around for the next few weeks as we try to bridge this gap between now and the start of training camp when the content really starts to roll in hard and hot and heavy. And I'm sure if I know John at all, John will be out at camp. He will have lots of nuggets for us as we go through this process. We may wind up doing shows at different times to accommodate him being at practice. We'll just have to see how it goes. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining us on the Blue Star Lunch Hour today. As always, this show is sponsored by Silver Moon Financial. Silver Moon Financial is my accounting and finance company for small businesses. If you are a small business owner and you suck at accounting, don't worry about it. Most small business owners do. Most small business owners did not become small business owners. I'm going to say that word a lot. They didn't become small business owners to become accountants. They did it because they love to work on HVAC systems, or they love to create the product that they're creating and sell it to their customers, or they love the service that they're providing to their clients or customers. That's why I became a small business owner, is because I love doing this and helping small businesses. You didn't do it to become an accountant. So if you suck at accounting and want some help to learn how to do it better in QuickBooks, go to the link in the description below. silvermoonfinancial.com/guide is the address. It will get you 10 steps to being much better in QuickBooks Online. If you're like, you know what, I can read your guide, I appreciate it, but I just suck at it really bad, and I want somebody else to handle it for me, I'm your guy to help you with that. Just reach out to me. You can. My DMs are open on Twitter. You can go to silvermoonfinancial.com and fill out a form there to request a call with me from that. I'm so thankful for you guys. I'm so thankful for this show and this platform. I'm thankful for John for joining me on it. Hopefully his internet stuff gets fixed soon, and we will be back next week. We got lots of fun stuff coming. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good one.